Hello, good evening, and welcome. As I think it was the two Ronnies. I can't remember which star from the 1970s used to introduce his programs. Hello, good evening, and welcome. David Frost, that's who it was. Anyway, never mind David Frost. You've got David Vance with you. So, first of all, warm welcome to everybody joining the stream. Yes, this is the third one you've got from me today, actually, but I'm very pleased. I've got my special guest, Rebecca Butler, going to join us in a second or two. So you've seen enough of me, more than enough for one day. But yeah, so usual routines. If you're watching this on Periscope, send hearts, send a super heart if you like. Give your finger a digital workout. Come on, I'm watching you. And similarly, if you can share it on Facebook and YouTube, etc., that's great. So without further ado, and there should be have a drum roll here, but I don't have a drum. So anyway, let me introduce Rebecca Butler. Rebecca, good evening.
Hi, David. And first prize goes to Tosca today. Well done. She beat
all the way from Canada, it must be said. Oh. So you know, for those Brits on the stream, you're being beaten by Canadian. So well done, Tosca. I don't know what's happened to Jed, by the way, Rebecca. I haven't seen him for a couple of days, so I'm not sure if he's missing in action or whatever, but no doubt he will pop up again. But anyway, thanks very much for being with us, Rebecca. And we've got a great topic we're gonna cover. Oh, thanks, by the way, for all the numbers joining. That's great. Thank you all. Basically, before we get into the main topic, I just want to give those of you who may not have been on earlier a quick update on my visitation from Her Majesty's Constabulary, who have identified me, obviously, as a person of some ill renown, ill repute. And so I had a visit there a couple of hours ago for the crime of going to the garden centre, picking a few plants, and not wearing a mask. So two policemen came to the door to not interview me, have a chat, a friendly chat on the topic. Essentially the issue was that I tweeted out a very stern picture of me. It was quite cold, actually, in the garden centre, and they needed to talk to me about it. So I was delighted because, as you can imagine, Rebecca, it's great to know that the police have so little else to do that policing Twitter, and God forbid someone like me who won't wear a mask for perfectly within regulations reasons have the time to do that. I mean, I was so impressed.
Yeah, thrilled. I mean, that's really good news for citizens and burglars alike, that they spend their life on Twitter. I hope they follow you formally and not just stalk you. I hope they contribute to your numbers.
Well, I would hope so. I really sincerely do hope that the local PSNI are following me and absorbing all that I have to say. But, you know, the interesting thing was not just the complete waste of police time, Rebecca, but also the fact that, you know, that they seem to think it appropriate to have me explain myself to them. I was asked, because I have an exemption. By the way, anyone can have an exemption. Just go into the government regulations, download your exemption, perfectly within the law, perfectly within regulations. They did ask me, Rebecca, well, can I ask what your exemption is? So I did have to explain, no, you can't ask what my exemption is. I've explained to you I have an exemption, and that's the end of it. In which case, they backed off at 100 miles an hour. Two policemen, Rebecca, an elderly chap and a young chap. Well, I say elderly. Policeman, I'd put him in his early 50s probably. So that's young. But anyway, and a young guy.
50, so it can't be over 50.
Yeah.
Pension.
Yeah, well, the younger one was probably, I would think, in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. The older chap seemed embarrassed by the whole business. The younger chap seemed to be loving it. Well, so interesting, isn't it? But anyway.
Can I just ask, though, on the medical exemptions,
yeah.
Is being a conscientious objector a legitimate medical reason? So you can't be conscientious in your objection. You can't have a mental health reliance on not believing a word of anything.
No, you can't, but you can have an exemption, and it's stated in the regulations if the wearing of a mask would cause you great mental stress. And it would cause me intense mental stress to mask up, indeed. And therein, that's the regulation as it stands at the moment. But I think it's interesting, you know, it's almost like they want everybody to wear a mask and they want all discussion on social media shut down. So it's interesting, you know, some might say that's the stirring of an incredibly authoritarian regime. It certainly doesn't seem to me like very much like liberty and freedom, where people can agree and disagree with each other. Get your mask on and shut up, and that's it. Seems to be where we are.
So they're going to drag you to the gibbet and have a public shaming ceremony where we get to throw tomatoes and rotten eggs at you, or any? Well,
they could actually, because in the local village, just about 5 miles up the road, they've actually got in the centre of the square an old what do you call that thing? You know, the stock, and they put people's head through it.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, they got those. So I hoped I may be indeed the first COVID martyr. The history books will record me as that. So yeah, so it's all awfully exciting, and well done the police for such an effective use of police time. And I'm sure on behalf of every convict and ne'er-do-well out there, I'm sure they really appreciate this. And I'm sure whoever in the local place is stalking me, as Rebecca says, do the decent thing and follow me. I won't bite you, and perhaps you might learn something. Anyway, yes, Simon says, David for the stocks. It's an old stocks going back to, I don't know, the 18th century or whatever, or the 17th century.
Same age as you then? About the same age as you.
Now, Rebecca, unfortunately, you now have to leave the stream, but it's been a blast. So I listen. So that basically that's where we are, folks. So hopefully, if there's any more updates, I'll let you have them. But anyway, moving on. That little bit being said. So what we wanted to chat about this evening, and you can't have missed this story because it's a huge story. You've seen, I'm sure, over the last few days, all the stuff about Banksy's boat, or his ship in the Med, full of people trying to get across into Europe, and you'll be aware of this whole kind of taxi ferry service that's going across the Mediterranean, driven by people smugglers, of course, and that seems to have been gathering pace, and a lot of people are as concerned about that, I think, Rebecca, as they are about what's happening in the channel. So it's kind of all the same piece, and it's all kind of joined together. But what I thought would be really good, and your suggestion, in fact, let's dive into this topic and let's talk about exactly what's going on, who's driving it, what does it all mean. Woke boat, over to you.
Wokey boaty. Well, hello everybody. You know, I don't think there is a viewer amongst us who wants to see people losing their lives in tragic circumstances, or in any circumstances at all. But what we do know is that people smuggling is a highly lucrative industry. Now, when Angela Merkel opened the borders to Europe in what became the biggest migrant crisis of our time, even counting the diaspora of Jews from Germany in the Nazi years prior to World War II, what became the biggest migrant crisis in 2015, and many say wrongly led Britain towards Brexit, was Angela Merkel's open invitation to the peoples of the world to make their way up to Germany and take advantage of everything Germany had to offer. It sounds very similar in its way to the Chinese Communist Party inviting people to actually stop having just the one child and to have many children, because we know that population drives GDP. And Angela Merkel was actually saying, well, we'll be a wealthier country if we have all of these people working for us. That may or may not be true. But what was happening was that people were coming across into Europe at that time, really mostly through the porous border of Turkey and the porous borders of Slovenia. They were migrating across from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria predominantly, and they were coming across those Middle Eastern states through Turkey into those porous eastern borders. Now, you will remember the pictures of what happened in Budapest at the time, with people camped outside the various sort of transport hubs. The Hungarian government had a complete nightmare because they had no capacity to process all of the applicants who naturally had to go through Hungary and then Austria. They had no capacity to do it because they had to comply with Dublin III, and Dublin III requires them under EU law to process migrants in their first country of entry into Europe. And really 2015 was a sign of things to come. Now, we've always had a movement of people, certainly prior to that, and within the last 10 years, it's really got worse. We've had the problems in Darfur, the Iraq war, the Afghanistani war, the Syrian war. I think that David Cameron's policy was the very best in the whole of Europe at that time. I will give him the hands up for that, because what he said was, if you try and cross illegally, you will not be accepted to the UK. We will go to refugee camps and we will transport 30,000 Syrian refugees because they are fleeing war. We will rescue them from Jordan. And I think that was by far the best policy of all of the European states, and one that was applauded by the UN, because it cuts out the middleman, the trafficker, but it cuts out the criminals as well, because you process them in the refugee camp. Remember that Jordan had 3.5 million refugees post-Syria. And just remind yourselves, for those who have forgotten, that none of the Muslim states, except for Turkey, took a single refugee, not one. So the Muslim states have always expected Europe and the West to take their share of refugees. They do not see this as their problem at all. So we were then in a situation where, you will recall, people were turning up at our ferry ports, jumping on lorries, stopping lorries at gunpoint, slashing lorry tires, slashing open the cargo holds, jemmying open locks, you name it, hijacking the works. And so as a consequence of that, we ended up with the Le Touquet Agreement. And the Le Touquet Agreement was an agreement between Britain and France, whereby we were permitted to put our customs officers on French soil. And similarly, the French were entitled to the reciprocal rights of putting theirs on our soil, as if we gave a damn about that, because the French were not restricting or inspecting vehicles leaving France. And that's what the Le Touquet Agreement provides. All well and good, because you've got these stalag-style installations now at all the ferry ports, and anybody who's traveled through them will recognize what I'm saying. You cannot get near a ferry unless you're on a vehicle now. And in fact, a friend of ours came through Caen on Saturday night, and as they were creeping through the town of Ouistreham to get on the ferry, they had this sort of family camper trailer on the back with a canvas cover with little sort of shock cords around it. And a group of 10, so black, sort of Central African appearance people, were vandalizing it, trying to get into the trailer. So it was a real problem. So they had to run all the lights, and my friend ran the lights to stop the people getting into this trailer. It's a big problem, and you can't stop your car in Ouistreham, otherwise you will get attacked. So where are we now? Well, we know now that the porosity of the borders is everywhere from Morocco across the whole of the northern coast of Africa, all of those countries bordering the Mediterranean, plus Turkey. And the Turkey to Greece to Lesbos crossing is very, very short. It's about 5 miles, if that. That's a highly porous border. But the big issue I want to talk about is Libya.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, because Libya is one of the most important crossings. There is a Marrakesh agreement in place, and the Moroccan government has actually done quite a good job in creating a southern and eastern border. So again, it's basically Spain, Italy, and Greece that suffer the most from this. Yeah. So the Marrakesh agreement really covered the Gibraltar Straits crossing, which I have discussed before, having been there personally and seen dinghies crossing.
Yeah.
So Italy has a big problem because Lampedusa, the small island of Lampedusa, is probably the closest to Tripoli or Tangiers on that part of the African coast. And there's a bay that goes in, and it's sort of within, Tripoli is at the base, the southern end of this bay. But there are international water designation throughout all of that area. So the story really here is people trying to cross to Lampedusa. They claim asylum as soon as they get there. And then under Dublin 3, they have to be processed in Lampedusa. And then Italy said, we can't take this anymore. We have a refugee camp that can house 200. We now have 3,500. It doesn't take much imagination to work out what the conditions are in those refugee camps. All of the people are ID'd, so fingerprinted, processed, whatever. And there are NGOs who do that, and they are actually very useful because they are helping the government to process these claimants, and then they are diverting them, depending on where they've come from, what their technical legal status is. So we then, in the Angela Merkel 2015 summer, we had about 6,500 people drowned attempting those crossings. And the Turkey to Greece crossing was one of the worst at the time because the weather conditions were awful. And we then went on to a situation, David's gone off again, his internet's failed. So we then had a situation where the Libya crossing became the more common. The reason for that is because the political situation in Libya had completely and utterly fallen apart. And you may recall we did have votes in Parliament about whether we were going to bomb Tripoli and sort out their problems there, and we decided not to. We decided not to get involved, and consequently, Libya, post the death of Colonel Gaddafi, is now a highly partisan, extremely dangerous place to live. It's almost a lawless society. Welcome back, David. I ad-libbed, it's fine.
I have every confidence in you to do that, Rebecca. It's fundamentally... No, you're getting used to it, actually. So, yeah, sorry about that.
Big time. Right, so I just got to talk about Libya and the political unrest in Libya. So because now the majority of the crossings are between Libya and Italy, but it is by far the longest crossing by distance, by many, many factors. So the Straits of Gibraltar at its narrowest point is 9 miles. The Lesbos Turkish coast, it's no more than 5 or 6 miles. When you're leaving Tripoli or any of that in that bay of Tangiers and Libya, you're looking at a crossing of maybe 250 miles. So you're looking at
significantly more, yeah.
lethal crossing. So because Italy was taking the full brunt of rescues at sea, and the rescues at sea were happening by cargo vessels, oil tankers, people like me who are on pleasure crafts, all that sort of thing. Everybody was doing a humanitarian function at the time. And there were one or two NGOs. The one people may remember was called Aquarius, which actually has now been banned from operating because 400 people were subjected to absolute hell in a heat wave because they picked them up and had nowhere to go with them. But I'll come on to that. The issue with people going into Italy was that Italy has become the sort of the receiving center for Europe now from the whole of Africa. And I mean, the whole of Africa is emptying itself onto Italy and via Lampedusa and then Sicily. So what's happened? Italy and Libya struck a deal, and the deal mirrored the Marrakesh Agreement. And the Italy-Libya agreement set up a Libyan Coast Guard agency and set up an agreement that Libya would have a southern border. So just like Morocco, Libya would set up a sieve effectively at its southernmost borders to prevent this mass migration of people up from central sub-Saharan Africa up into Libya and then across the Med. All well and good, but NGOs got involved and said, and this is where Sea-Watch comes into the equation, they said that under the defoulment regulations of the Geneva Convention, when we rescue someone at sea, we do not put them back to a place where they are at risk. So NGOs like Sea-Watch have taken it upon themselves to decide that the intergovernmental agreement between Italy and Libya is not valid, that it is not recognizable in international law, which it is, because it was a marriage of international law and EU law. And so the NGOs have decided amongst themselves that Libya and Tangiers are not safe havens, even though, and I've shown this over Twitter all this weekend, Sea-Watch Bravo, Sea-Watch Tango, and Sea-Watch 4 sit just on the boundary of Libya's territorial waters, which is a 20-mile point. They sit there. They criticize the Italy-funded Libyan Coast Guard and say that the people are not safe to be rescued by them. They obstruct rescue by the Libyans, and they then launch their ribs, Tango and Bravo. They launch them to go and sort of basically decant the people from the dinghies into the bigger Sea-Watch vessels. NGO is a non-governmental organization. It's another word for woke charity, is response to your question. So it is an organization that says it is carrying out the functions of a governmental organization whilst being non-governmental. So, for example, NGOs might be things like Public Health England, for example, is an NGO. So it's non-governmental. But Sea-Watch is actually a charity and relies on donations.
How many vessels have Sea-Watch got, Rebecca? We mentioned 3 there.
So they've got 4 vessels, plus they've got 2, possibly 3 high-speed ribs, and they've got an aeroplane as well called Moonlight. So that they're quite big, but the vessels they run are pretty shot. They're barely seaworthy, as has been demonstrated perfectly well this weekend that what happened to Louise Michel is basically what happened to Aquarius, that they got completely overwhelmed because Tango and Bravo were doing the running backwards and forwards with people. They had, I think, 200 on board Louis Michel, which really is only licensed to take about 50. And they couldn't maneuver because of the sheer weight of people on their decks. I mean, you know, as a seagoing person, as a yacht master myself, I mean, I just shrink in horror to think that people who were setting off on a highly treacherous journey, because at the moment the weather in the Med isn't that great, and the Mediterranean can really, really kick up and be very, very dangerous. That's by virtue of being quite shallow. People being, you know, sort of rescued by a complete hackneyed group of amateur volunteers, on which you have two professionals on the vessel. So you'd have somebody like me driving it and somebody else as first mate, and then volunteers who haven't got a clue what they're doing. I mean, they're just non-hierarchical, flat structure vegans. That's how they describe themselves. So they are not seafarers. They're not doctors and nurses. They're just overprivileged do-gooders who encourage all these people onto their vessels, and the risk of sinking, or worst, capsizing and listing when you're over full, is good enough reason to shut the organization down. It was honestly, people were going on and on and on about Banksy. The real story was, what the hell are they doing? You're going to risk more lives by tipping a vessel. You will risk more.
Well, yeah.
Just be patient.
But was Louis Michel, was that the vessel that Banksy had provided some funding for? Right. So that was the Banksy boat, for one of a shorthand. Yeah. Okay. Got that. Yeah. Yeah. And presumably, if a vessel was to sink in those conditions, that would be pretty catastrophic, I would have imagined.
Yeah. I mean, instead of the 5 volunteers dying, you've got 200 rescued people dying or being in the water.
Yeah.
And you know what? Call me a racist if you will. Black people aren't known for their love of swimming. Very few African people can actually swim. I'm afraid to say it's not a national sport. And it's well known around the world that they don't learn life-saving skills. They don't learn how to swim. That would be 200 lost lives. So now, actually, somebody did die on the Michel as well.
So basically, this operation is actually risking life rather than saving life. Would that be a fair summary, Rebecca?
Certainly the Louis Michel this week did risk life. There is no two ways about it. And there ought to be a marine investigation into that. And they should lose their license for overfilling their boat. They may say they have a defense of necessity, but actually, as I showed on my Twitter, Sea Watch 4 was astern of the Louis Michel.
Yeah.
And I showed that really quite clearly because I've got the AIS tracker on my iPhone, obviously, and so I was following the boat's movements. And what they did initially, they overloaded so that they could get immediate assistance.
Yeah, as cynical as that, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, totally cynical. That they did it deliberately, and it was reported as that. LBC reported it, Sky reported it, BBC reported it. You know, vessel at peril. People will die if safe haven isn't given to this boat. But she has already, the skipper, Carolina Racketa, has already been prosecuted for entering a port illegally with an illegal cargo. Yeah, so she's already been done for that in Italy. And they were saying, no, you can't bring them to Lampedusa because our migrant camp is full. You can't bring them to Sicily because, by their way, there is a COVID pandemic on the global scale. And we have no means in Sicily of containing COVID. We can't cope with Sicily.
Yeah.
And then they tried to go to Malta.
Mm-hmm.
And then they turned around, and they last saw them now with the full cargo on Sea-Watch 4.
Yeah.
They're now heading back towards Spain. So 3 months' time, they'll be on a rubber dinghy coming into Kent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. See that, and this is how it all links together, isn't it? Hang on a second. I think I see a troll on the line. Rebecca, just bear with me 1 second. But it does link together, doesn't it? The whole thing, what's happening with us and what's happening over there. We're linked, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, nobody says we shouldn't have humanitarian principles. Nobody says we shouldn't take asylum seekers. Nobody says we shouldn't allow people who have a familial link to retain their familial links with an asylum seeker. All of that is entirely legitimate within the law. You might not like it, but that is the law, and that is a fact. And I personally think that we should have a sensible asylum system. But this isn't asylum. Even the UNHCR says that this illegal trafficking of people is undermining genuine asylum claims. So the point I was trying to make is that Sea-Watch has this glazed-eyed, woke agenda to be the saviors of the planet. And you read their stuff. What they're saying is what we are doing is absolutely fantastic. We're within the law. We're within the Geneva Convention provisions for defoulment, which is you can't send people back to an unsafe territory, all that sort of thing, that they have over interpreted to their advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem is that they then dump them in a refugee camp in AN country bordering South Europe on the Mediterranean, the northern shores of the Mediterranean, and they don't give a damn what happens to them after that. So they've been put in the dinghy by Libya, say, Tripoli. Yeah. They've been by the way, the people smuggling is estimated to be worth 1.5 billion US dollars in Tripoli alone.
So, and actually, Rebecca, just on that, I'm sure people on the stream understand this, but it needs emphasized. The people smuggling industry, it's colossal. It's bigger than many other entire European industries. So on that basis, it's it's follow the money tends to be leading you to the problem.
6 billion euros is the estimated worth of people smuggling into Europe. I don't know what the UK, the Dover Straits industry is worth, but I do know that housing illegal immigrants is worth 2 billion to Serco to run the contract. And I suspect that's gone up during the pandemic because everybody's been taken off the streets. And so now, as people have seen, 4-star hotels are now being commandeered to house illegal immigrants. So we're in a complete mess because we're not allowed to speak truth, which is the only way to stop the people trafficking is to stop making the NGOs available to assist them. As I said, they are subverting the Italian efforts, which is why Matteo Salvini fell out massively with Sea-Watch and imprisoned Carolina for taking a vessel illegally into Italy. As it actually happens, the Italian courts upheld her appeal. But, you know, she has left it to herself to decide where a safe haven is. And rather than turn around and go into Tripoli, she refers to the formerly set up under a treaty Coast Guard agency of Libya. She calls it a so-called lifeguard service. That, you know, I'd encourage people to look into Sea-Watch. They have some rhetoric on their website. If I could just share my screen,
yes,
quickly, I'll just show you some of the. So here's the airborne monitoring fact sheet.
Hang on a second, Rebecca, because this is. I don't want it sharing my screen. I need it to share your screen. Let's see where the screen sharing. It's such a wonderful technology, this, when it works. And when it doesn't work, it becomes a pain in the bottom, but nonetheless. I'm trying to see, Rebecca, if I go to you, hang on. As you can see, Rebecca and I rehearsed this to infinite detail to make sure that all these things work so smoothly. So, try to see your screen. Rebecca, have you got something put up on your screen? Can I just check?
I have, yes.
You have. So, yet when I look to see, it's not. No, that's not showing it, is it? So I need to take that off. So, not sure, Rebecca. We're having.
Well, I'll come back.
Oh, hang on. Showing this tab the stream stop. Yeah, I don't know why. Don't know what. Sorry, Rebecca, on that. Oh, hang on. Something's appeared. Hang on, folks. I think we're going to have with a drum roll again. The second one of the night, Rebecca, and boom, there it was. There we go.
Okay, so as you can see here, we've got my cursors along the bottom. We've got the coast of Libya. We've got the international line here showing the UN boundary of Libyan waters. And these are the airborne rescue missions. So this is their airborne carrier calls in these positions over the course of 1 month. So as you can see, the orange dots are boats, the pink dots are empty boats, and the dead body, there's one here, 21st of July, you can see a dead body there. Quite often, by the way, they lump people over the side if they're a little bit inconvenient on these boats. But you've got Malta here, and you've got Lampedusa here. So Malta is an independent EU nation. Lampedusa obviously is off Sicily, which, by the way, is here where it says project. That is where Sicily is. So, but the nearest port, really, effectively, in Sicily is well round onto the northern coast up here. So you can see these are the numbers of airborne sightings to which Sea-Watch have attended. So all of these orange boats have people on them. And that is just in 1 month from the airborne sightings. This is not the seaborne sightings. This is just airborne. And you can see how far into Libyan water they go on their rescue missions. So you might argue that these vessels here are closer to Malta than they are to Libya.
Yeah.
But I would say anything sort of from here down is closer to Libya than Malta. And then from Lampedusa, you'd say, well, you've got some coastal towns here. It's not only Tripoli you send them back to, by the way. You've got all of this coast, all 1,500 kilometers of Libyan coast to transport people back. But what the hell are they doing here? What are they doing operating in this area is my question. But you see that Sea-Watch, this is August 24th. So this is talking about the Louis Michel. What they're saying is that Sea-Watch 4, their boat, has rescued their boat. That's what they're saying here. And they describe it to the arbitrary blockade of civilian rescue ships by European states. Can you see the wording down there?
Yes, well, I can. I hope people
arbitrary blockade.
Yeah.
Inhumane migration policies are deadly. That's what this NGO says. And just Sea-Watch is their new one. This is a live tracker I've got going here, and there's Sea-Watch there. That's Sicily, that's Lampedusa, that's Malta. There you can see that flasher there. That is Sea-Watch 4. So this is the information I get on my tracking device. I can show you where the boats are. So it's traveling at 7.4 knots, heading 300. So it's kind of heading probably up the coast of Sicily.
And that's the vessel with what, a couple of hundred people on it then?
Yeah, so that's the vessel that rescued that's the vessel that rescued Louis Michel, basically. So what happens, and transfers at sea are phenomenally dangerous things to do, because you got bouncy boats in waves, and then you try and bring another boat alongside. It is no mean feat transferring people from one to the other. So they get them all aboard the Louis Michel, the Banksy pink boat, and then from a rib, which is okay because ribs are soft and spongy and you can bump them up. But actually, when you've got Louis Michel to Sea-Watch 4 transfer, it's a totally different kettle of fish. It is an extremely dangerous thing. And there's a handful of women and children on board. You're talking negligence at sea. Seriously, I mean, as a mariner, I'm really, really angry by what they've done, overloading that boat this weekend. But that truth will never come out. You have to be able to read between the lines and understand the law of the sea and understand how boats work to know that what they undertook was horrendously negligent and could have cost all these lives. So I know a bit of ranting here, but I just do want to go back to this. Charities and NGOs have no place undermining international treaties. They have no place doing it. And the problem is people are coming over with an expectation that all the money that they've spent on people traffickers will be worth it in the end, because the golden chalice of Europe awaits. It doesn't. It doesn't. Nobody tells them the truth. They'll be sitting in a freezing cold tent in Paris, maybe, or in Berlin, living in a complete SH1T hole somewhere. Europe is facing the biggest loss of jobs ever in its history.
Yeah, that's right.
Because of this. And they're being sold a dream, or worse, being sold into servitude to pay the debt to the people smugglers. It is an absolute disgrace. And our immigration laws make provision for people who are Commonwealth citizens. If you are not illegal, i.e. a criminal, you have a right to come to Britain. So if you have a right to come to Britain, if you want to do it illegally, jump on a plane for the same money and don't risk your life. If I went to Ghana, that's what I say to them. Just buy a British Airways ticket for the same money. Why are you undertaking this perilous journey to just fund people traffickers? That these guys are victims of crime, and we're doing nothing about it.
I see, Rebecca, someone's described you as a great mariner and not even ancient. So there we go.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, the whole thing is is such a misunderstood topic. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this. I think a lot of people on the stream, Rebecca, have picked the charts that you were sharing with us, showing the movements of boats. Those are things that most people don't see. That's going to be 0.1% of people who see that kind of stuff. But yet, I think a lot of people have said, I see comments here saying that kind of makes it all feel real, because you can jump on your software and you can see where the boat is and where the boat's going, and that makes stuff real. And as you say, Rebecca, the fundamental thing is, if those people get to whichever destination, sooner or later they're going to be in a dinghy to Dover. Like, that's the greater reality. And the other thing which I want to completely endorse is, I think they've been sold a fool's paradise, because so many of them end up, especially in France, living under bridges, in absolutely grim conditions. There is no promised land. And with COVID, it's definitely not a promised land. But
and winter weather that they're not in any way equipped for. I mean, I think I told you before, we were driving through Paris last November, and we had to come off the Périphérique at the Stade de France, and ended up sort of crawling through that bit of Paris. Yeah. And it was mile upon mile, and I am not exaggerating, miles of tents of refugees, all Black Africans, to the last one. I didn't see a single hijab. I didn't see a burqa. They were Black Africans, freezing cold. And, some of them were quite friendly. So down my window went, and I spoke to the guy and I said, "What are you doing here?" And got chatting to him because the car was stationary. He said, "Oh, I'm from Ghana." And I said, "Well, why are you here?" And he said, "I'm going to get a job." I said, "No, you're not. This is Paris. Nobody's going to give you a job." No. Why didn't you go to Britain? Because it's an ex-colony, and I know for a fact that Ghanaian people have a right under our Commonwealth laws, our Commonwealth duty, to come to Britain. And he said, "Oh, I got people trafficked," meaning he's a villager, didn't know any different. Yep. Nobody told him, actually, for 3,000 euros, honestly, you can afford a business class flight and a hotel stay, and then never use your return flight. If you so wish to be that illegal that you just jump and don't, or put in a dodgy hotel, nobody checks. He could have. I got hounded last week by these predominantly Muslim immigration lawyers who call themselves human rights lawyers for saying this. And I was saying that illegal immigrants are not asylum seekers. They're two different things in law. And of course, I got pounced on, and they were demanding, "Where do you practice as a barrister? What's your chambers?" So I didn't respond to them. I just thought, sod off. I don't answer questions. Right. I ask them for a living. I don't answer them. And, they hounded me. They absolutely jumped on me, saying it was a disgrace that I was putting out all this inaccurate stuff. And I said, well, go and have a word with the UNHCR, because that's what they've said. It's not me. And I note that while you're criticizing me, you haven't seemed to put the record straight on where I've gone wrong. You're just saying I'm wrong, but perhaps you could tell us where I'm wrong, because I know I'm not wrong. So, you know, it is a big problem. There is a diaspora from Central Africa, people looking for a better life. Who can blame them for that? But it's their own corrupt, horrendous governments that have created the problem. It's not our problem as, you know, ex colonists or ex colonials of these states, that their transition into being independence hasn't been entirely successful, because you only have to look at India to know that it can be successful, or Canada, or Australia and New Zealand. So it's corrupt African states are not looking after their own people. And why do we have a duty to do it? We don't.
No, you're absolutely right. But as you said earlier on, this is such a big industry. The whole people smuggling industry is such a big industry. There's so much money. There's fortunes being made. And I think it's really good, actually, on this stream. I'm really pleased about the fact that, you know, Rebecca, you've talked about it, and I echo, we have to look upon these people as they're human beings, some of them making really foolish, very foolish, potentially life-ending decisions by handing over their fortunes to these people smugglers, and but for the grace of God and all of that. So I think it's really good to have this, to look at it, folks, this way. You know, we can't just be, there's lots of things to dislike, people smugglers being one of them. And also, of course, I guess, Rebecca, like all those things that you can see on your phone and whatnot, what's happening in the Med. Obviously, every government can see those things, and have presumably departments that see those things, but they don't do an awful lot, do they?
Well, I mean, it does require acts of diplomacy, which are beyond the wit and ability of the EU. Now, a lot of our viewers are going to be interested to know what the Brexit interplay here is. So this is really, really a hot topic at the moment. And I mean, I'm looking into my crystal ball a little bit, and I'm quite good at crystal ball gazing, because the French are going to say to us, aha, you want Le Touquet, you can have Le Touquet. You want another agreement, which is about French Coast Guard picking up in French waters, equals fishing rights. So if you want us to police our waters for your benefit, you give us access to your waters for our benefit.
Yeah, I would think that. Yep. I would think that's very likely, Rebecca. Yeah, I see that one coming 100. But the French have been bad actors throughout this, haven't they? In many regards. I mean, how much money have we given them, and what do we get for it?
To be honest, we've given more to Serco than we have to France.
Also bad actors, yes. Yeah, in fact, actually, Rebecca, you mentioned Serco earlier. I saw a whole pile of comments coming in. This is definitely not the Serco fan club.
No.
But 3 billion, yeah, Serco have done very well out of people's misery, haven't they? And created more misery.
Yeah, I think we've committed in all something like 600 million. I think we gave 300 to Le Touquet agreement. But you see, the poor old French, you've got to feel for them, because really they don't want to be in the EU. They want to have a border. They want to have customs checks. They want to be able to throw people out. They don't want the jungle at Calais, and they don't want Sangatte to exist, but it still does. And people are living in the forest, and they're living on the coastline. This is not what they want. And short of the French putting sea defenses in, literally sinking posts around the coast, how are they going to stop the launch of vessels? That is the only solution, is a physical solution.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I do agree with that. Yeah. That is
a solution, because diplomacy doesn't work, because you apply diplomacy to one geographical area of France, and
it shifts.
people, smugglers go round it. So you physically have to put concrete posts every 3-4 meters in the sea to produce a physical barrier.
But
they'll still get over it. They'll still make the poor buggers swim out to their ribs. But
so therefore, are you saying that the real thing to do is, if you're going to deal with this, you have to deal with it at source, which actually isn't necessarily northern France. It is what's happening much further south. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but you know, Pete, I don't want to extend this conversation too much because like this has been a complete dump of data so far, and I don't want to put people off. But when we're looking at all the dialogue around Black Lives Matter and how we should be feeling guilty for the empire, while Portland, Oregon is burning, or Kenosha, Wisconsin is burning, by the way, China is creating the empire that is causing these people to move from Central Africa. I am not exaggerating when I say the Belt and Road Initiative has cut a swathe through Africa, and the goddamn corrupt Black African governments, because there are no white ones there, the corrupt Black governments have pocketed Chinese money. They've lined their own pockets. They then come to London and buy property in a shell company registered in Panama or Costa Rica or whatever. And they do not trickle down the money into their own economy. China screws them in many ways. I could do a whole program on China and the Belt Initiative. I did a talk on this back in February on COVID and why Wuhan and Northern Italy have such a link. It's all about one belt, one road. This is China's imperialist policies are impoverishing African people. But how the hell do we stop it? You tell me. I would love to know how this behemoth of Chinese money corrupt regimes is going to come to a standstill, because I can't see how. Forget Muslims. You should be looking at Chinese people right now. China.
The Chinese Communist Party, in my view, Rebecca, and I think maybe what you and I should do is we should do a special just on this Chinese topic, because I think people have heard me talk on other platforms about this, but you know, I haven't done one specific. But I again, we agree that China has bought a significant chunk of Africa, and well, it's actually it's bought. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the difficulty is that you asked the question, how does that end? I don't know. But what I do know is that we need to talk about these things. We need to let people I think people here do probably understand that China is a kind of existential threat. But it's in a way, you're right, Rebecca. You can trace it back, if you like. Corruption in Africa, care of Chinese money equals they don't give a toss about their own people. So their own people then get out to hell, and who can really blame them? They get into the hands of the people smugglers. They get up to the Med. They get across the Med. They get up through France. They come to the UK. And yeah, it's complex, isn't it?
All they want is a better life. And I'm totally sympathetic to that, because their corrupt, horrible governments have let them down, because they want the Chinese money in their own pockets. They don't care about their public funds. It's in private money. It goes into pockets. And the Chinese, the deal that they strike with the African countries is, we don't want your lazy workers. They just sit under trees all day. We'll have our Chinese workers building the mines, the bridges, the roads, the railways, the ports. So that's why so many Chinese people are in Italy, because the Italian ports and high-speed rail infrastructure is being built by Chinese people. Hello, 5 million of them traveled with coronavirus into Italy in December. So, you know, I could go on and on about this, but the real, I know we get wound up with BLM and Muslims and hijabs and blah, blah, blah. But the big ticket is China. Honestly, Muslims are not going to bring our downfall. It's going to be China that is causing this problem.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the first presentations that a lot of people may have seen that draws the connections right the way back to China. And again, I completely see it the same. Actually, the only solution I see for this one, if I think about it, is in November, if Trump is re-elected, Trump is plainly not a friend of the Chinese Communist Party. He has shown a degree of muscle against them. He could show a lot more. Other nations could also join in, not least this one. This United Kingdom is so much in the back pocket of the Chinese, which again, Rebecca, we can talk about in a separate presentation, but that's a huge worry in many ways as well. So yeah, there's it's like everything else. There's lots of problems out there, but it is important to identify them, and that helps us then discuss, well, how do we solve them? But
because the migrant story is a story of personal suffering and risk, and we are sympathetic to that. But America doesn't face the existential crisis caused by China that we do, because America is not open to China. A lot of people don't know that our government was so desperate to get HS2 built that they asked the Chinese to tender for it on their Belt Road Initiative policies. So, and part fund it, by the way, on a debt between Britain and China. A lot of people don't know that. So nuclear, Huawei, HS2, we are no different, because we quite like the idea of Chinese money and the anecdotal evidence that things Chinese build are very good. In fact, the simple answer is they're not, and people die in their droves on Chinese construction policies. So our government seems to have forgotten the Beijing Olympics very, very quickly. And what happened?
The thing about the Chinese don't respect IP. They don't, but they're very good at thieving it, and then they can knock it out because of cheap labor costs. But it doesn't work. It breaks down. I mean, the idea of them building a nuclear power plant, kind of horrific in many regards for this country. But that was one of the big wheezes of successive governments. And but it's just very interesting the way in which, Rebecca, it links it. Things are connected, you know. We live in a connected world. We're all interconnected watching this tonight. And, so when we see those vessels in the Med, when we see the dinghies in the channel, somewhere in the background, all the way back to China, there is a fundamental cause, and it needs dealt with. Somehow, Rebecca, it does need dealt with.
Yeah.
Or it will deal with us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just feel sorry for people who think they're going to come here in the winter and have a better life, because it's going to be freezing cold. You'll have no money. When this corona pandemic is over, the hotel treatment goes, and you're not going to have a job, because none of us have jobs. 3 million unemployed at the end of October. So we haven't got any big infrastructure projects, because HS2 is just like dribbling along. We haven't got a nuclear power station on the build.
Yeah. But as you said earlier, Rebecca, that economic crisis, as we've talked about enough, is 100% coming along the rails. But it's the same in France, same in Spain, same in Italy. They've got huge economic issues. So again, it comes back to what we started talking about. These poor people, for whatever reason, fleeing the corruptocracies of Africa, are being completely suckered. And they don't benefit, and they can't benefit, and they won't benefit, because they're going from the frying pan into the fire, but someone's told them the fire is nirvana, and it ain't. And it's going to be bad. Anyway, Rebecca, we have come to the end of our hour, despite technical interruptions, so which were probably so smooth, no one even realized that they that they happened. But anyway, listen, Rebecca, as always, a huge thanks to you for being here with us on Monday evenings. Really appreciate you taking your time and providing so much. I can see lots of lovely comments here, lots of really interesting information. That's if there's nothing else we achieve in this channel, we provide information, data that people can talk about and think about, and then maybe it will help you folks think broader about some of these issues, and that's hopefully going to be helpful. So again, thanks to you, Rebecca. Thanks to everybody for being on the stream. My apologies for turning up 3 times on Periscope today. It sure as heck won't happen tomorrow unless I'm taken in chains to local stocks to be pelted at. But hopefully with the social distancing, that should be not too bad. And in the meantime, I will bid you all good evening. Catch up with you folks all again on Wednesday night. And in the meantime, speak to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.